Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our, we are live. Welcome to our regularly scheduled first work session of the year, Monday, February 5th, 2024, a little after 7 p.m. here in the Commissioners' meeting room. Mr. Berman, will you call the roll?
Commissioner Gondek.
Present.
Commissioner Forsty-Grupp.
Here.
Commissioner McCloskey.
Here.
Commissioner Cavender.
Here.
Commissioner Quinn.
Here.
Commissioner Hart.
Here.
Commissioner McCollum.
Here.
Commissioner Trombetta.
Here.
Commissioner Holmes.
Here. Chief?
The United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Folks, we have several things of some significance this evening to go over in our work session, as well as a pretty good-looking agenda for next week. So let's dive right into it. Our first presentation tonight will be a discussion of the 2023 pension performance. We will have before us Sarah Hart and Mike Glacken and Jim Kennedy, representing the three organizations, PFM, CIBZ, INR Advisors, and Thomas J. Anderson Associates, who all manage the township pension funds. So want to go in the order of our agenda. Ms. Hart? Are you together? Are you going to switch out? All right, Mike?
So this is a lot different than last year. In fact, completely the opposite almost. Last year, if you remember, 2022, we're getting up here saying how we have to stay the course. And now we're back again, and thankfully we stayed the course. Quick summary on CBIZ INR. Mike Glacken, president of CBIZ INR. We are an all-market indexed advisor known throughout the Commonwealth for using index strategy, Vanguard funds and BlackRock, and concentrating on the asset allocation to try to do our best within the given risk-reward characteristics of the committee to hit your assumed interest rate over the long run. So 2023, much different than 2022. In fact, we saw large cap growth stocks. In fact, very small portion of growth stocks, 7 to 30 stocks, had almost all the growth in 2023. And we benefited from that, using that all-market approach. People remember three things about our approach. Number one, you own almost everything in the markets. On the bond side, you own over 14,000 bond positions by owning the indexes. On the stock side, you own over 5,000 different stocks, so totally diversified. What happened at the end of 2022, value was the winning asset class, not growth. So we actually tailored value down, bought growth. So I'm going to go through a few of the things that went right and a few of the things that were missed in 2023 in our strategy. So for 2023, our portfolio was up 15.06%. We have the charge of being the more index diverse platform, which gives PFM the ability to reach for alpha and certain spots. So up 15.06% total. The blended benchmark was up around 15.97. What happened in 2023 on the equity side, again, you had large cap growth was the main asset class. And having such a diverse portfolio, we own large cap growth, large cap value, mid cap, small cap, and international. So we benefited by underweighting international. We had a bias more towards U.S. versus international. The bias towards small cap stocks and mid cap stocks, which has helped us outperform the benchmark over the long run here. Since our inception of having the privilege of working with you since 2008, we've had almost 80 basis points over performance since 2008. That has come from the bias towards small and mid-cap stocks. That did not help the performance on the equity side in 2023. but your portfolio on the equity side with us was up roughly 24.39% on the domestic side. On the international side, we had a 16.12% return, so domestic obviously did better than international. We had a lighter weighting towards international than most institutional advisors, so that did help. The drag against the benchmark, we're in the total international market space. So the benchmark that's being used for your pension plan is the EFA, which is more developed Europe, and Asia and your emerging markets had a tougher time in 2023. So that was the main reason for the underperformance in 2023, but we've had overperformance over the long run here. On the bond side, we had overperformance compared to the Barclay Ag. Your bond portfolio was up 5.98%. Barclays Ag was roughly up 5.6%. That came from us lowering the duration of the bond portfolio early on. Later on, what we did was reach for yield. So overall, our performance up 15.97% for 2023. Again, much better news than 2022. So the main thing I would say is staying the course helped. When I say staying the course, really staying the course. By selling value, buying growth. Now growth is the winner. We tailored down growth and bought value at a discount. Eventually we're going to look smart. I just can't tell you when. So I'm going to end with that based on time. And I'm going to kick it over to Sarah. Sarah will go through PFM and then the total fund as it stands today.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Mike. Hello, everybody. I'm Sarah Hart. I'm probably a new face to most of you. I'm here for PFM Asset Management. I am recently stepping in for Bikram Chadha, who I'm sure you've seen many of these other years. So thank you for having me. Similarly to the themes that Mike spoke on, in 2023, certainly a reversal from 2022. And the large story in equity markets were the Magnificent Seven. So Apple, Amazon, Meta, NVIDIA, Tesla, those names really drove the majority of the return, especially through the fourth quarter, which is where we saw the year end in those positive double-digit return numbers. So that was interesting domestically, again, leading compared to internationally, and then in specific IT and tech stocks. So in the broad market, certainly beneficial in that those are part of those indices, and that brought up the return across the board. Some of the things that we saw as more of an active and tactical manager were if some managers didn't hold just one or two of those seven names in the Magnificent Seven, we would see some underperformance relative to those benchmarks. In the S&P 500, the Magnificent Seven was about 60% of the yearly return, and in the Russell 3000, that was about 50% of it. So unique on the domestic equity side. Also on the fixed income side, we saw some real returns for the first time. We just released our 2024 capital market assumptions, and whereas before we had fixed income potentially earning 2 to 3% in the long term, we've now raised that to the 5, 6, 7% range for the longer term. So interest rates and the Fed were the other main driving theme for this year, trying to time how quickly rates were risen by the Fed, and then now looking out to this year, how quickly will they end up cutting those rates. So a little bit of a roller coaster throughout the year, but some of the moves that we made that helped and hurt, similar to how Mike discussed. In March of 2023, we went a little bit tactically overweight to mid and small caps. Exactly as Mike said, that was not beneficial in the year 2023. That was where we had the Silicon Valley Bank failure, as well as a few other mid and regional banks. So that led to a slight underperformance in the spring. We removed that tactical overweight in May, and again, kind of stayed the course throughout the summer. One of the really beneficial positions and changes that we made in August was to add an international equity broad-based index ex-China. So reducing your China exposure, given that the numbers coming out of their economy have been poorly negative compared to other international emerging markets. And with them being such a heavy weight in the international space, that's been kind of bringing down some of those international returns. So that was a very beneficial move for the portfolio. In addition to what Mike said, going into high yield and lower duration fixed income also added value for the portfolio. So getting into some of those numbers, For 2023, the PFM portion of the portfolio returned about 14.67%. That's against that same blended benchmark of 15.97%. And the 5-year return, which I think is important to note here, given that 2022 was negative 15% or so for the portfolio, here we are at the positive 15% or so for the year. The 5-year return is still holding up at 8.31% for the pension plans. And so compared to that discount rate of 7.5%, in good shape there, still outperforming and ahead of that discount rate despite kind of the crazy volatility we saw in 2022 and then now 2023, at least for the positive. When we look into the asset class returns on the PFM side, we had for 2023, the domestic equity return was 21.63%, international equity was 16.52%, and fixed income was 7.17%. So I think that our returns definitely, we saw some negative in the third quarter. Everyone was kind of wondering where the year would end up. The fourth quarter ended much stronger. We saw the market kind of broaden out. A lot of that was positivity about the potential for rate cuts going into this year. But certainly, again, staying the course, seeing what the Fed does, where those decisions lead us. I think that the way that the PFM and CBIZ portfolios complement each other is capturing a lot of that broad-based index and not taking those active tactical decisions at some points where in the early 2023, it is beneficial to kind of ride the market when you have a few of those names leading most of those indices, but also on the PFM side to capture some of those different tactical points, such as looking at what's going on in China. Unfortunately, the mid and small cap, not the best move there given the banking crisis that later followed. But we continue to work well together and outperform for the plan, which is great. So thank you all, and we look forward to continuing to do that.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Jim Kennedy. I'm the nuts and bolts person in the trench, and I definitely am a new face to many of you, but a very old face that's been around doing the actuarial pension calculations, all of the fun stuff for a very, very long time. And I wanted to say to all of you, I'm president and owner of Thomas Anderson Associates. We're one of the largest consultancies in pension consulting in the state. We're local. We're right here out of Westchester. We take care of well over 300 plans, the bulk of them all across Delaware, Chester, the whole area here. We've been doing them for 30 years. And I just am super proud about the work we do with this township. And I just want to tell you all that in advance. And the other thing I will say, you have one of the best management teams here that we have the pleasure of working with. You have an inordinate amount of volume of people and transactions and a lot of stuff going on. And let me just tell you, the attention to detail that this team across the board, between Dave, Amy, Jolene, the people I work with day in out here, are exceptional. And one of the things that we're seeing is really a talent drain across municipal pensions, where senior people have retired. COVID took a lot of hits, and it's really difficult to find people that have expertise. And this is very esoteric stuff that you have to do day in and day out on very detailed calculations and wage reporting and all kinds of things. I handle all of the sort of state fussy reporting requirements that have to come up for state aid, for pension financials, any of that stuff year in and year out, we're taking care of. And without the right team in place, it makes that a challenge. We're probably doing 20% more work just to stay in place at areas that don't have those kind of capabilities. So in terms of the investments too, and I want to talk just briefly about these two firms, I see investment returns across the state on what's going on, fees, all of those things. And there's only two firms that I recommend to clients when they're going out and looking at investments, and it's these two right here. They know what they're doing. They're experts in municipal pensions and cost of living transactions. When we have problems, things get fixed quickly, and we usually don't have problems because they do a good job, know what they're doing. The returns are on the upper echelon, and the fees are on the lower echelon. So they really, really are good professionals and know what they're doing. I want to take a little bit of a step back and then a step forward, because pensions, you have to look at this stuff in long-term horizons, 20, 30 years, because that's what happens. Think about it. Somebody goes into their career and they're there 25 or 30 years. So you look at these things, and you don't want to sort of make jugular quick decisions based on the market and other things that are going on. So some of the basis that Haverford has put in place a number of years ago have really paid off during some of the tough times. So I want to congratulate the team here, the board. So a couple of those things. One, with the cost of defined benefit plans. Number one, in 2011, putting in place a defined contribution plan. That's been a significant saving and a great plan for the municipality here. A lot of larger entities and throughout the state have all done the same thing. Some about the same time, but a number of them a little later on. And it really protects you from some of the market hits that people have taken, in 2022, which I'll talk about in a minute. The other thing that we did is we had a higher assumed interest rate for the plan a few years back at 8%. Most of the municipalities did many years ago, and it didn't really matter until, interest rates dropped down to zero or negative, and it was really difficult to get, steady returns without risking up the portfolio. So one of the things that we did, and we all knew that 22 was going to happen sooner or later. So back in 1921, talking with Amy and the team here, basically what we did was we dropped that rate down from 8 to 7 and 7.5, and we also had you on smoothing, put it on market, and we've always been encouraging the township, and I do it across the board to all of our clients, to pay in the higher market value MMO amounts on an annual basis. If you don't, all you do is kick the can down the road, and then you have a really bad year like 22, and then it's 10 times worse trying to dig out, from that thing. So really dropping the rates, doing those kinds of things, and taking proactive measures. And the other thing from an actuarial standpoint that we're always doing, everybody's living longer with plans. So you have to change the mortality tables and constantly update that. So all the municipal plans are now using a new public mortality table, so those things get reflected correctly. So all of those things have helped with this hit that we took, which was major because you've got a lot of assets in these plans. 22 was a year that affected pensions all across the country and across the state, and it's going to take a number of years to dig out from those investment losses. You have to pay them off over time. It's like a mortgage. We call it basically an amortization, and it takes like 10 to 14 years. It just depends. So what happens is the MMO, the minimum obligation, that's what you put into the pension plan on an annual basis. It spikes up for that period of time to basically make up for that investment loss. So where we are and what we do in Pennsylvania is every 2 years we do what's called an actuarial report, and it's like a balance sheet at that point in time. And I just need to give you a little education. So when I talk about this, it's like, what's he talking about? So every 2 years on the odds, 21, 23, the next one will be on 25. It's on the prior 2 years that we basically do the evaluation, and it takes into account what happened with the demographics in the plan, how did the markets do, how did we do on our assumptions. So every 2 years there's this reset, and we say, okay, where are we today? What's our funding ratio today? And that drives the next 2 years on what you have to pay into the pension plans. So 23 took into account 22. So as you can imagine, it was a big hit across the board to everybody. So the MMO, the minimum obligations for 24 and 25, guess what? They ratchet up accordingly. So overall, and the way the state looks at it is your 3 pension plans combined, you're basically approximately at 80% funded on a smooth basis at that point in time. When you look at municipalities at this size with the assets in that plan, that's really, really quite good overall. I'd like it to be even better, than that, but there are very few plans, unless they're small or fairly unique, that are really 90% and above, at least in the state. There's a few of them out there, but there's a lot down in the 60s, low 70s, and it's because they haven't been putting in that higher amount every year and also tweaking the rates and those kind of things. State aid, by the way, was a nice contributor. That is an offset to what goes in from the municipality, and that actually went up, the unit value went up by about 12.5% in 2023. So that kind of helped a little bit. That's unique a little bit to have that chug up, but that's like 1.4 million that helps you all offset basically your pension costs. So where do we go from here? in terms of thinking forward, the next things that I would try to think about are, number one, for you and Amy and the team, and she knows I'm like, the kiss of death broken record that comes in. Berman's known me for a long time, and I tell people like it is. And so two things. One, we want to continue paying that higher amount into the plan. And even if there's any excess budget to put in, because minimum means minimum, you can always pay in a little bit more, for the rainy day. And always recommend that. Number two, even at 7.5, what they're going to tell you is ideally the assumptions right now, depending on a 60-40 return or so, they're around the high sixes, 6 3/4 or so. If you're a little more aggressive, maybe 7. I want to get our rate ratcheted down a little bit from 7.5, and that's costly because it affects the MMOs. So we kind of gauge with the team here how and when we can try to do that depending on the market returns and things. And we can bring that down in sort of a staggered step fashion by like a 1/4 basis point over the next couple valuations. I'd like to see the target get us down a little bit, closer to 7% on that. But that's really the prepared remarks. Love working with the municipality. Thanks for all your time. Hope I didn't bore you with too many details here. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks.
Jim, let me ask you, because you anticipated my question about our assumed rate for funding going forward. It's going to be your recommendation in 23 that we reduce that?
Well, the next val's coming up. It's 1/125, and I'd love to see you ratchet it down. We held it constant on the 23. We dropped it on 21 because what happened is we had the conversations with the finance team here and said, look, your market value, we're going to sort of make this change now while it's affordable and smart. And so we were very proactive in doing that. What I'd like to see is how things are kind of coming along. We've got plenty of time. See where the investment returns are, how we're doing, and maybe try to drop that down to 7.25, potentially if we can, on the 1/125 report that'll be coming up. So, and maybe another 1/4, but let's just see how things are. But I'd like to try to do that depending on how everything else is playing out in the macro environment.
And one last comment. You're about 2 months too late on your praise for Amy and Dave. We already dealt with their salaries for 2020. So you might want to come back
I
in
saw
November
that, by the
or
way.
December.
I just did the payroll. No, but honestly, and I don't say that lightly, these folks have known me for a long time, and it's just we are struggling losing talent in municipalities. And I'm telling you, Amy will call me. We'll be on the phone sometimes on a weekend or even at 7, 8 o'clock at night on literally like a $55 variance in something, and they work it through. So, trust me, what I say is super accurate and special with that group. But anyway, thank you, and look, go ahead. If there's anything else I can share with you, I don't want to dive into too many details, but we do that a lot with them. So thanks for your time.
Thank you. And thank you for recognizing our highly talented leaders here. I appreciate it.
Appreciate it, and all of you. It's good now you've got a face from that. They keep me in the shadows most days,
Well, you should get out more.
Unfortunately, this time
Very
of year,
pleasant presentation.
I'm not sure what day it is, actually. We're 7 days a week, kind of crazy, so take care all.
All right, thank you all. Any of our colleagues have any questions for any of these three? So next, I believe we will be having a presentation from Herbert, Rowland, and Grubik, our Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Plan. Excuse me for one moment.
Good evening. My name is Tim Staub. I am an assistant vice president for Herbert, Rowland, Grubik. And I was the project manager for your Park Rec Open Space Plan. With me tonight is Caitlin Mills. Introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Caitlin. I'm a planner with HRG, and I was leading most of the efforts here with Tim. So we're ready to talk to you.
Good evening.
She's selling herself short. She was the primary author of this document, so So our agenda that should take us about 3 hours to get through will be introductions. We got through that. Project overview, community engagement highlights. We want to give you some key plan components and then what we recommend as your next steps. So our project team, HRG was the lead consulting firm, but joining us was Campbell Thomas and URDC to assist with trails and connectivity, as well as administrative maintenance and personnel. However, I wanted to recognize the committee that worked on this project, and we actually have quite a few here, so if you wouldn't mind raise your hands that participated. Come on. As well. Yes, thank you. This was a great group to work with. I will echo the previous presentation. You're not paying Brian and Eileen enough, but apparently those reviews already happened. But they were great to work with. They answered all our questions and provided a lot of detail to all of your recreational assets and your programming in your community, which you should be commended for all of what you have going on in this community. It is a lot, and we'll get into how your community feels about that. Wanted to take a moment to indicate that this project was fully funded by the Delaware County's Greenway Grants Program, so no taxpayer dollars were issued, no township taxpayer dollars were taken out of for this project. So about the plan. So Parks Rec Open Space Plan is an overall vision document related to parks, recreation, and open space, greenways, and trails for your community. It's where we take a look at your existing conditions, compare it to growth projections for your community, and then compare it also to national trends associated with those topic areas. We provide you as the commissioners as a decision document based on public input and engagement, as well as a steering committee that drives the process. And it also helps inform to prepare grant applications for funding the implementation proposals coming out of it. So as we worked through this process, there was a lot of questions that came to us. So how does this relate to the Brookline Park Master Plan? And what is it? Was it different? Is it really different than the comprehensive plan? So briefly, the comprehensive plan is a 30,000-foot view. I'm telling you something that you already know. It discusses land use, transportation, Parks Rec Open Space Plan, community facilities, housing, and several other topics. Recreation, parks, and greenways trails are discussed in that comprehensive plan, but only at a macro level, at a 30,000-foot view. This Park Rec Open Space Plan then looks down at a 10,000-foot view, where we're looking at specifically at the township, making recommendations on those topic areas, as I just indicated, and offering implementation. And then Brookline is a specific park master plan where we're looking at how it impacts the neighboring community and how can we pull the neighboring community into that park, what kind of programs should be happening at that park, and should there be future amenities provided to that park. So that's how it all relates. Copy your plan. At the beginning of this process, the steering committee agreed that they wanted to develop a goal for this process, and the goal was to develop a plan that would be implementable when we got to the end. And I believe, if you haven't had an opportunity to review it, that it is implementable, and we'll show you why. But the progress essentially it kicked off with our team meeting with your team and going out and looking at all your wonderful parks, identifying who's at your parks, who's visiting them, some of our safety concerns that we have identified, some areas where it may have been some wear and tear, some areas that we could think could be improved. Then we went and listened to you. We had key person interviews with people that will help with implementation, as well as some of your users groups had open houses, which we received great information that, again, Caitlin will share with you quickly. Online surveys, don't want to steal her thunder, but you guys had one of the best response rates that we've had in years. And again, can't say enough about your committee. And we then went in and drafted the plan, worked through the comments from both your staff as well as the committee, and we're here today with the final report. So, public engagement highlights. Go ahead, Caitlin.
All right, we said we were going to try and keep this to 12 minutes, so I'm going to try and go through this fairly quickly. But we did have a fairly large and robust engagement. So we had 2 online surveys that we conducted throughout the process. We had 10 key person interviews, which were with groups, and we'll talk about them in a second. And we also had 3 open houses, and this was separate of working with the committee and township staff. And we met a total of 7 times, I think. So the online survey, so the first survey was really a visioning survey and sort of getting initial feedback. So we had over 2,800 respondents to that first one. The second one was more prioritization, and we had over 1,000 responses, and about 58 of the respondents from the second survey had replied to the first survey. So it was about 3,200 unique responders for both surveys. So some key highlights were that the favorite parks or the most used parks were the Creek and Andy Lewis Park, sort of together. The Paddock Park was fairly popular, along with Mary Place and Grange Field. 24% of respondents had identified a trail as their favorite park or most used facility. And a lot of people visited your parks for the playgrounds, trails. A lot of people provided other. So it's just grouped there together, but there's a bunch of different responses that Brian and Eileen have, and then also fields. Overall, most residents felt that the maintenance of the park was good. They rated them 4 stars out of 5. And then there were also, on the second survey, we had asked if people did not use a specific park for a specific reason, and about 18% of respondents had identified a specific reason at a park why they don't use it. And all of that information then was shared with Brian and Eileen too, so they could see the reasons behind why people may not be using a park, because it could be a simple fix. And then key person interviews. We met with various different groups throughout the township. So these people really helped focus in on different key areas of the plan. So as we noted, there's different aspects, and these groups normally were about 2, 3, 4, 5, some were even larger than that. And we met for about an hour, and it was held as an open discussion. We had some guiding questions that we wanted feedback on, but we really wanted to let them speak and hear what they had to say about their experiences within the township. And then we also held 3 open houses. So these were held with a brief presentation, and then we had breakout stations where people could go and provide comment or not if they wanted to, but many people did stay. So our first one, we were focusing on visioning and gathering information. So we were sort of this broad view before we got more detailed in our next meetings. We had about 44 people sign in for that meeting, and we collected about 250 comments. As this one, like we said, was very broad and vision-based, so we really let people speak at this one, and that's why there were so many unique comments. And you see at the second public house, we really provided draft goals that we wanted feedback on to see if these met what people told us in the first meeting. And then we also worked on park amenity prioritization, seeing what amenities that the community really would want to see more of. And we had about 53 attendees at this one. And this one had less comments just because of the nature of the activities that were held. And then the third meeting, we provided everyone with draft goals and objectives, and we helped walk them through sort of prioritizing them, what was most important to them to get accomplished coming out of this plan. We also identified a top 15 connections, which we'll touch on a little bit later in this presentation. And those were connections that included trails, sidewalks, etc. And we had about 23 attendees sign in for this meeting. It was a little bit lower, but the Sixers were also in the playoffs, so I think that might have had something to do with it. And now we're going to talk about some plan features. These are going to be high level. Obviously, there's a lot more detail in the plan. So some areas of focus were providing better facilities for park residents and park users. Sorry, not park residents, residents and park users. Enhancing and protecting the open spaces, trails and connectivity, how people access parks and trails. Improving maintenance, helping find areas of efficiency, and also determining potential future capital investment needed to replace existing amenities in parks in the parks. So within the plan, there's goals and objectives. These are organized by topic area. So there's park and recreation facilities, trails and connectivity, open space and natural resources, programming and maintenance. It helps just organize everything so you can sort of see what is within each category. And we really used feedback and conversation from the staff. The steering committee really helped us narrow these down, as well as the feedback from the surveys and the key person interviews and the open houses. So then one of the things that also came out of this plan was the top 15, and these were trails and connections. They ranged from planning and design projects to bike lanes to intersection improvements that people identified as being a dangerous intersection to cross. Again, we utilized all that feedback that we got, and we really narrowed these down. So a lot of them you'll see are along trail corridors or extending trail corridors, because that was a really big thing that was important to the community. Came out with how much people use their trails, and it's only going to be more important going forward. So I think I'm going to hand it off to Tim now to talk about implementation recommendations and next steps.
Yeah, so those key topic areas, as you can tell, is an iterative process built off of each community engagement. We refined the process, tried to get as much detail to provide back to the township as we worked towards implementation. And we also were able to identify implementers at the public meetings of people that were excited about a trail or excited about maintenance. And then you will see in the plan itself, there is implementation tables based on each of the goals and objectives that provide both the priority, the time frame, funding, and estimated cost range. Some of these items are generic just because we don't know the timing of when you want to implement these items. The committee tried to assist us with the prioritization, whether it should be high, medium, or low, but obviously if a massive funding cycle that has occurred over the last year or so coming out of the pandemic happens again, then you should capitalize on that and elevate a lot of these implementation items. The other thing that was significant in this development of this plan, when we came in, we heard that maintenance was a concern, and we wanted to address how to address maintenance. One thing that was significant that a lot of other municipalities do not have at their disposal is a database of all of the amenities that you have, all the equipment you have. However, during this process, we identified that it didn't have a life expectancy associated with it or a replacement cost. So we added those two items there to add in to assist with capital improvements planning. And as you can see then, one of our next step suggestions is for the Park and Recreation staff to take that database and then work through capital improvements planning, but also long-term planning to understand whether or not there is enough budget associated with recreation to pay and do replacement at all the park amenities, or so that way there are no surprises moving forward. Also recommending to then take a bite out of the trails top 15 and find a project that makes the most sense and secure funding for those to move that forward. The key thing that we've discovered here, and I already commended you on this, is your community is very interested in parks and recreation and open space. You should continue listening to them. Continue giving them opportunities to provide feedback, whether it's just a survey, a newsletter, or an online survey itself, or at actual events. That is priceless, and it will help you to make sure that your parks still may remain current. We're also suggesting that you utilize the implementation tables, use the flexibility associated with that, and continue investing on your parks and recreation amenities. That is all we have this evening for our presentation. Again, we'd like to thank you for the opportunity to develop your plan, and it was an enjoyable process with your steering committee. Any questions?
Any questions from my colleagues?
Yes, so under the next steps, you identified a couple of things, I guess, just from my kind of knowledge. Is your group involved in this next steps, or is this basically you've done your report, your evaluation, come up with a plan, and you're turning it over to, Brian and his department, Parks and Rec? Like who is in charge of making sure the next steps actually move forward?
On behalf of HRG, we would love to continue working with Haverford Township, but we are not under contract after this now. That would be Brian and Eileen and your steering committee and Park and Recreation Board. But as indicated, we'd love to continue working with you.
So to follow up on that, what would that look like? What should the next phase look like of a plan like this?
So it seems very mundane, but I would recommend doing the capital improvements planning, because you can then review your allocation of what you have in recreation, determine when some of your equipment's going to sunset, and not get surprised by like, hey, I got to replace 5 pieces of equipment this year, and we didn't budget for this. So then you can identify, the peaks and valleys and maybe have a steady stream. Then you can go and then determine funding necessary associated with that. Everybody wants to put something in the park, right, and then get it out and or establish a new program. But what I think that you've done successfully is navigated all of the years of having equipment and having programming, and you've delivered to your community. But I'm not sure coming out of it how sustaining is it, because a lot of your equipment is now starting to get to the end of the life, and there's obviously new equipment out there that's better, may have better lifespans, as well as there's landscaping that you could do that could reduce your fees in mowing. You have a lot of areas that you could go to low mow or no mow, and there's other recommendations that are in the plan. As we heard through the process, that there's a expectation for maintenance because you have great parks. So maintaining that is also difficult. And that is one other thing that I am remiss without saying is we also evaluated and compared your personnel staffing related to national standards based on your acreage that you're maintaining, as well as your population. And then we did a comparison against the joint municipalities. We do understand, and congratulations, you did add to your staff there, which is needed. But you'll see that we also recommended to add more to that staff, just if you want to maintain what you have here right now.
Where did we fall? You charted us compared to what national averages or state averages or medians were?
From a personnel standpoint?
From people dedicated to the Parks and Rec as a proportion of the acreage covered by our town.
So you fall short in two areas, and that's not what you guys want to hear, but that's why we're here. You fall short in the total number of people maintaining your parks, but also you fall short in like specialists. Like a lot of communities your size have arborists on staff that help maintain, and you have a ticking liability in all the wonderful trees you have out there. And you probably, I know Brian has been dealing with, well, last time we saw him, he was getting constantly getting phone calls about a tree down because it was a storm the day before. And so.
Yeah, I don't think we can keep relying on the once every 5 years, 100-year storms to cull our tree herd.
Yeah. But what's going to happen then, and the unintended consequences of taking all these trees down is then you're not going to have any shade. And if you don't have any shade at the parks, what's going to happen? You're going to have less people using your parks. So you may have to put in temporary shading to help offset.
Plus, we're going to cook the vegetation and probably wear out the equipment faster.
Correct. So there's a couple things that we recommended. I think we were, 3 short?
Yes, about 3 short, but in the plan, there's a few different tables. So I recommend that you look at them because there's sort of a lower quartile, median, and an upper quartile. So you can sort of see, it's very dependent on a number of different things. You know, if you're cutting grass and you have someone cutting grass all day, that's a lot more labor intensive than some other sort of, like we said, if you have a bunch of low mow landscapes, then that can reduce the number of hours that you would need to maintain. So there's a ton of different factors, and we even spoke with some of your adjoining municipalities, as Tim said, so there's some comparisons there to those municipalities. But again, every community's parks are so different. So we recommend it, phasing in people over the next couple years, which is in the implementation table. But obviously, if you can reduce hours, man hours, that helps in other ways too. So I would check out those different tables in there.
And I have a question about that, and I just want to make sure I'm looking at it correctly. I think you're referencing, and for the clarification to the people that might be watching this or in the audience, your summation was just that, it was a summation. Your actual report, I believe, is about 94 pages. And I will say, having looked over the report, it is a very, very detailed report that obviously took a lot of time and provides a lot of feedback and probably took a lot of input to create. But when I look at the park maintenance section that starts on page 66, it highlights that, that our staffing levels seem to be below the median. But am I reading this correctly? We're also below our neighboring communities. I think it looks like you looked at Lower Merion, Upper Darby, and Radnor.
Correct.
And from a staffing point of view, we're below them also. I just want to make sure I'm actually looking at this correctly.
Yes, I believe that is correct. I did not look at it today, but
Yeah.
but again, like we said, their facilities are very different than your facilities. Some of them have more parkland acreage, so we tried to lay that out in there as well. And I'd be happy to share. I will share actually those tables again with Brian and Eileen that are separate from the document, so they have all the background data too. So.
Yeah, it's difficult because every community's park system is different. So, maybe more acreage, maybe more passive as opposed to active fields. So that was the thing that, Brian and Eileen didn't want to hear when we're sharing this, and Brian's like, but these people have this, and these people have this, and we're like, yes, we understand, and we'll explain that in the report, but it gives you at least a starting point of the discussion.
We were also below the median in funding as well.
Yeah.
Right.
You mean external funding or budget?
Our budget
Yeah.
is below the median for similar size communities with similar parkland.
Yeah, so you've done a great job of stretching that dollar.
I had a quick question on another topic.
Uh-oh.
So we got a nice master plan for Brookline.
Okay?
Can
Yeah.
you just talk a little bit about the value of a master plan for a park? And, I haven't had a chance to read the whole report, but does each park need master planning? I have to imagine maybe smaller ones don't, but what are just some thoughts on kind of industry standards on that kind of thing?
Yeah, so not every park needs a master plan, especially if it's already been built. There are takeaways that you could utilize from Brookline, probably from to other parks. And just because you've been through this process then as well, not to take away my opportunity to consult, but you've been through the process, you probably know the questions you want to ask them, and Brian and Eileen probably have those same questions that you can ask. However, there may be a contentious situation that you want somebody to help you facilitate through that discussion. But large in part, you're looking at, can you get to the park? What is the park going to be utilized for? Is there going to be programming, or is it just going to be non-instructive play? Is there ways of saving costs? Such as that we were suggesting earlier, the low mow landscaping, or does the area have to be, boundary to boundary grass that we have to maintain? And who's going to use it, and ultimately how you design it. The community I live in, at one point, they had thought it was a great idea to put a huge full-size soccer field right in the middle of a neighborhood park. The unintended consequences is that it turned into a club field, which then turned into practice every night in that neighborhood, which turned into parking, overrunning that community the entire, every weekend in the fall and the spring. And that's not what those neighbors signed up for when they said, I want to be beside a park. So those are the little nuances that you have to look out for. But not every place needs to be master site planned, but there are some takeaways that you could have. Like when we did the site tour, we're going forever here, but the one thing that's noticeable, and it's based on trends, like all your playground equipment and your order parks are separated. And so therefore you guys have to mulch every area. The modern way of doing things is to put everything in one area and then just mulch one large area or do a poured in place pavement there rather. So that way you're saving time from a maintenance standpoint or saving an investment by putting in a porous pavement.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Thank you for this report. It's very thorough. I have a question. A couple different places in the report, it was recommended that we improve our reservation system for scheduling field usage. So to use the scheduling software, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that.
You want that one?
Yeah, sure. I'll take this. This was mainly heard that people just don't know when fields are reserved, and it does cause Eileen to have to go back and forth with people as well. And just if you had a software where people could see when fields are being used, that would be helpful. That's really the main thing there. It just helps improve transparency between when fields are being used for public or for, clubs or your youth sports organizations or anyone else. And it lets people also, it might be easier on Eileen if someone could come to her with dates and suggested times because they've already looked at a calendar or something like that. But we understand there's also some things that could cause issues. So it's a recommendation, but it's ultimately going to be up to your Parks and Rec department to determine what's going to work best and also be safe for everyone as well to make sure that everyone's,
So do you know of any other municipality that uses this kind of scheduling software and how well it has worked for them?
It all depends. Some communities' fields are mainly school district fields, so that's different, and they might have coordination with them. Some only have a handful. Some only have one sports organization that uses the field, and they can just write them a permit for, those days all the time. So it really depends. Most of the time, it can improve scheduling, but if what you're doing is working and maybe it just needs some tweaks, then that's also okay.
I think more transparency is always good for our community, but thank you for answering that question.
No problem.
Does anybody else have any questions for our guests?
I just have one other question. I know, under the amenities section, you have, kind of a summation of the number of amenities we have in the township and kind of the condition they're in and the cost that it would take to replace them. It's a large number. My question is, what was the foundation for that cost number? In other words, when you're coming in and as an example, saying, the 15 amenities that are in poor condition, have, not counting installation, have a replacement expense of approximately $340,000, like where does that number come from?
Yeah, so there are some assumptions in this, which I think we tried to outline to our best within the report. But we used your existing amenities database that you guys have, which is fantastic. You guys had photos, condition, everything like that. So we sort of used the condition of each facility or each amenity, and then we looked for comparable replacements. So it's not going to be dollar for dollar. It's, a play structure could range. You could spend, $150,000 on a play structure. You could spend $25,000. So we sort of picked, an average price for each amenity in there. And Brian and Eileen have the database that lists all of those numbers that we use. So it's going to range. That's not going to be a perfect number, but we wanted to give a sense of what that could be. And the life expectancy is broken down in there, I believe, that say, 1 to 3 years, 4 to 7 or something. Sorry if I'm misquoting. But it's all broken down in there. So we sort of try to give you, a middle of the road. And it could be different. You could remove an amenity and it's not going to be replaced when its life cycle is done. So there's different various things that can go along with that. So I hope that answered it.
It does, thank you.
And it's based on 2023 costs too.
Yeah. And I guess what I should say is there is some assumptions in there for inflation, actually. So Brian and Eileen have those numbers in that table. So we sort of assumed, over the next so many years, it's going to increase by this percentage. So there is that percentage factored in there as well. So they could see those numbers without that if they would like. I guess anything else?
Does anybody else have any other questions? Thank you very much for your work. On behalf of the township and all of us, we appreciate it greatly. And we will, if we find ourselves in the need of excellent service, you will probably be the first call we make. So thank you both. And we will look forward to considering this next week at our regularly scheduled meeting.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Have a great night.
Before we move to the next item, which will be our police update, I will just alert the public. We did meet in executive session before tonight's meeting to discuss issues involving litigation and litigation. Now we will have the chief come forward and give us the latest.
Thank you, Commissioners. The Chief of Police report for January 2024, criminal arrests 14, juvenile arrests for 0, traffic citations 117, non-traffic 8, written warnings 45, 457 parking tickets were issued. On January 2nd, 950 Westchester Pike for a burglary at the Ladder Country Club. Staff discovered unknown people entered the clubhouse through unlocked door, took some shoes, pants, and some cigars, nothing of any value. They went through 15 or 20 lockers. Video showed there were juveniles. The investigation is ongoing. Had 2 motor vehicle theft attempts, 300 block of Glen Ridge. Jeep Cherokee was unoccupied, was pursued after it was taken with keys, was pursued by Lower Morion Police Department. They found it at 1900 block of Fuller Street in Philadelphia. And YMCA keys were stolen out of a locker and a vehicle was taken from the parking lot. It was recovered in Wilmington, Delaware. Thefts from auto, Happily report is only 3, 2500 block of East County Line Road, 1300 block of Harrington, and the 1400 block of Winter Park. Canine usage Westchester Pike Coles, theft suspect fled from police, and I reported this last month where a police vehicle was rammed. The canine tracked and the male was located at Upper Darby and arrested. And we assisted Eddie Stone with a narcotics sniff on a vehicle investigation, and assisted Radnor PD when a prisoner escaped a car stop. That's my report.
Thank you, Chief. Any questions for the Chief?
Thank you, Commissioners.
Okay. Next item is any commissioner committee updates. Is there anybody on the board who would like to report on any committee happenings? Hearing none. Next week, we will be considering quite a few things at our meeting. I'm going to first put them together generally, and then I will ask whether anybody has any questions specifically. We'll be considering 4 ordinances next week, 2 of which are second readings, and 2 are first readings. We will be considering 7 resolutions next week. We will be approving the chief of police. Well, we will be considering approving our police chief's contract extension. We will be considering the Parks and Rec and Open Space Plan for approval. We will also be considering purchases by the police department for 2 electric Chevy Trailblazers, 3 Tahoes, and 1 4x4 all-terrain vehicle. Public Works will be putting together, will be presenting to us general operating and capital projects purchases. We will also, under ARPA funds, be considering 6 purchases of different items. We will also be considering contract approvals, amending a contract award in the stadium. We will be tabling that for a month. There's been a development in that contract consideration, so that will be taken off next week's agenda. Also for our consideration next week will be various appointments. The Finance Department will be asking us to consider the appointment of special counsel for Act 51 tax work. We will be considering the appointments to the Bryn Mawr Playfield Association, an alternate member of our Civil Service Commission, appointments to service on the Grange. The Sixth Ward owes a senior citizen appointment to the Senior Citizens Board. Also consideration for us of the Vacancy Committee, the Vacant Property Review Committee. We will be also proclaiming 2 events. We will be heralding the work of a fine member of the Sixth Ward who was recognized by Delaware County for a lifetime of engineering work, as well as we'll be recognizing his work for the township. And we will also be proclaiming Black History Month. In particular, going back to our ordinances, one thing under consideration for us, we have recycling, which is a second reading, and traffic, which is a second reading. Stadium, we will be considering the lease renewal for the cafe. Does anybody have any questions or?
Yes,
comments?
Chief, about the one up by Saint Faith, we're going to pass that, and then we can change it in March, the one.
On that parking on Olson Road?
Yeah.
Yes, we've had a lot of discussions with neighbors, and you're aware of that, so
Yeah.
we will be making some changes with that, yes.
Okay, thank you, and I will reread that so great again to Larry.
Excellent. Looking forward to it. We will be, any thoughts on the stadium, anybody? Resolutions will include the use of ARPA funds for the 4x4 electric ATV for the police department. We'll be considering subdivision and land development at 14 Claremont Boulevard. We will be considering under ARPA funds, library's request for funding under the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, DCED, ARPA funds for a multi-purpose community facilities program. We will also be considering a resolution to request funding for the work on the stadium locker rooms. This will be funding from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, DCED, as well as our ARPA capital funds. We will also be considering the purchase of heavy-duty equipment, the use of ARPA funds for that. And we will be announcing a public hearing in zoning to amend Chapter 47 regarding amusement devices and Chapter 182 entitled zoning. And finally, we will be considering by resolution a preliminary and final plan at 2224-2228 Haverford Road. Mentioned earlier, we'll be considering Chief of Police contract extension. In particular, I did mention the police department purchases. In particular, under Public Works, we will be considering the purchase of an F-350 regular cab with Western Pro Plus plow, as well as another F-350 Super Cab, the 9-foot Western Pro Plus plow, an All-Tech 75-foot tree bucket truck and an international cab and chassis, an HV607 international cab and chassis for our recycling truck, a recycling body for a cab and chassis, that would be a 20-yard capacity, and then finally a pole barn for the Public Works yard with a concrete pad. I mentioned the ARPA resolutions. Out of the ARPA resolutions will be purchases we'll consider for a 2024 F-650 cab and chassis, a 2-ton Falcon asphalt recycle body, a 2024 Caterpillar 938 front end loader. We will also be considering a 2024 Broom Bear sweeper on an international cab and chassis, and a Brush Bandit 18-inch tipper with winch, 3 Salt Dog Pro 1500 electric poly, and 3 hopper spreaders with an auger. And that is what is on our schedule for next week. Does Any of my colleagues have any questions or comments, additions or deletions to anything we just, I just went through?
Question on the subdivision plan for 14 Claremont. We need to make a decision on whether we're going to look for a fee in lieu of open space. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, fee in lieu of open space, is that right?
I believe we.
Um, We have has the planning commission recommended that?
The planning commission gave it to us to make a decision on requiring either a conservation easement or a fee in open space. I believe it's in here that it says, and so I had a question about that.
Well, let me go to. Got it.
A review letter is referenced, and item number 7 says as much. A fee in lieu of for open space or for parks and recreation, or a fee in lieu of. I thought the planning commission recommended the fee in lieu of, but I don't know for sure.
Well, we have the planning commission. I believe when I watched the meeting that they said
They deferred it to
ultimately
the
that was
board.
our decision. They didn't make a formal recommendation. And my question is, if we, just how that fund works, if we ask for a fee in lieu, does it need to be for specifically for open space, or can it be used for something related to our parks that already is an open space?
Or under the municipality's planning code, if there's a fee in lieu of open space, that fee should go to either an open space conservation or recreational activities that could be used by the units or the visitors to those units that would be utilizing that land development. So it should remain park and rec, and it should remain in somewhat of the general area that's
So
accessible.
something related to a trail, theoretically.
As long as that trail would be accessible by this land development, then that should be sufficient.
So it would need to be, I mean, we're talking about, we're talking about 3 homes across the street from Manoa Shopping Center. So
If you were going to use that money to improve a trail on the other side of Haverford
see.
Township,
Okay.
likely wouldn't pass scrutiny.
But maybe if it was for Darby Creek Trail that was closer.
Something that they could realistically or reasonably use. Doesn't have to be right on their yard, but something that's reasonably accessible to them, that would be an appropriate use of those funds.
Thank you.
What is our history of accepting, of imposing a fee in lieu of open space with regard to developments?
Well, I think there's a requirement with these land that there be some open space, that either there's a conservation on the property that you could say that these 3 homes can't use I'm guessing, the back 25 yards of their property, that no structure can be placed on that, or we would request that funding for open space or fee in lieu.
I'd like more details on this. So currently there's 30,600 square feet in these 3 building lots. They're being divided into 3 lots, just about equal size, 10,210 square feet, 10,208, 10,208. Lot to be proposed on each is going to be about 1,800 square feet, so under 20%, I guess, of the existing space. How much open space is required, and would we otherwise be waiving if we accepted it fee in lieu of the open space? What was the requirement? Does anyone know?
It depends on the zoning district that it would be located in. And it's usually per acre fee. This is located in which zoning district?
1 acre is 44,000 square feet, so we don't have an acre here at all.
5. But you would take a percentage of that fee.
Do you?
What you'd want, but it's the R5.
I believe it's an R5.
So it would be 40,000 per acre. be the fee, unless there was a per unit fee, which I do not see there being there. And 30% would be required to be set aside for open space.
Now, but open space is not space open to the public. Open space is undeveloped space, meaning you don't cover it, you don't put a driveway, you don't put a porch, you don't put building, right? So for a 10,000 square foot lot, they have to have at least 3,000 feet of grass or existing undeveloped land. Is that what it is?
This would be for open space, for the public's use, generally, under this dedication of land provision, which is common. The municipality's planning code has a specific provision that you can put in your subdivision and land development ordinances, which you've have back in 2011, with the intent that if you are adding additional people or additional employees, or if there are going to be people in your township that are going to be using your resources, that the person who's building that development also needs to be able to provide space for them and for the community to utilize, whether it's passive or active recreation facilities or playgrounds or trails. There would be a requirement that a certain amount of land be dedicated for that purpose. If you can't do that because it's an infill development and you simply don't have that requirement, a fee can be paid for that, and again, used for those same recreational purposes.
It's for residential.
It generally is for residential.
With this,
It does, and I'm looking at 165C of the subdivision land development ordinance, dedication of land for recreation. It's the intent of the section to provide for adequate recreational lands to serve residents and persons employed in the township. It recognizes that residential, commercial, and industrial uses create a demand for local recreational lands and facilities. So yes, it would be for residential districts, R1 through 4, R5 through 9, office districts, commercial districts, light industrial districts. So yes, it would apply throughout.
with the fee that we're discussing, this particular lot, which is being divided into three, it's three houses, but this will be house 3, 4, and 5 on that street from this particular developer. I just want to make sure I'm clear on this. So the fee itself is only for these three houses, the land that these sit on, that those other houses don't fall under any of these, these requirements.
That's correct. That would be the property that's subject to this land development. So was it one parcel being made into three parcels? So that would be those three parcels that are being created, which again, three houses will likely be built upon, would be subject to the fee.
Are we expecting to have will we be hearing from interested parties about this at our next meeting?
The planning you could watch the planning commission meeting. There was a discussion, a back and forth from the lawyer representing the builder and the planning commission.
Yeah, but what I'm wondering is we have often at times when it then comes before us for action, sometimes we see the lawyer, we see the parties that are involved come before the meeting. Does anybody know whether anybody's appearing before us next week?
In listening to the planning commission meeting, I think that I don't expect them to come. I think they're expecting us to ask for a fee in lieu of.
Okay, all right. I will watch it. I recommend that my colleagues who didn't also watch it. But I think your question was answered?
Yes.
Good, excellent. Anybody else have any thoughts on this or any other action?
A quick question on this one. I see that one of the recommendations from the planning commission was 2 parking spaces. Is that it doesn't make reference, is it just 2 parking spaces on street, or does that include a driveway? Does anyone?
The parking spaces are off-street parking spaces.
If they're off street. So each one of these, so basically they have to ensure that they can demonstrate 6 off-street parking spaces in addition to their driveway.
Well, the driveway can be a parking space.
Okay, that's what I meant. So they just have to have 2 parking spaces, whether it's on street in front of their house or in their driveway.
Oh,
On their property.
Okay,
right. Street does not count
okay.
for parking spaces.
Oh,
Are there any other questions or comments on this or any other matter before us?
One about the zoning hearing thing, that's going to be on the vape shops, right?
The public hearing would be on the smoke shops, vape shops,
Stores.
convenience stores, hookah bars. It would apply to all of those facilities, and it would identify the C5 commercial zoning district, the shopping center zoning district for the significant tobacco retailers.
Okay. Are we planning that public hearing for our March meeting?
That's correct. It would be for your 6:30 p.m., I think, is what is in the resolution on the evening of your March work session.
And Dave, just to clarify, when you say the shopping center, the zoning the zoning code you were talking about, that specifically we're referencing Manoa Shopping Center, correct?
It would include Manoa Shopping Center and the 3 parcels to the left and the Sunoco station on the corner of Manoa and Eagle.
Thank you.
Do better than the 3 parcels on the left. Which
I'm
direction?
sorry. So if you're looking at the Manoa Shopping Center, it's the Citizens Bank going towards 476. It's the Citizen Bank, the
But there's already one there.
the Faux Place,
Right.
and the existing smoke shop that's there. Commissioner Quinn, that's correct. And so
Heading west,
Heading-
heading on the northern side of Route 3 going west from the Manoa Shopping Center.
that's correct. And it has, the draft of the ordinance is going to reflect a, similar to what the board adopted in 2017 with regard to medical marijuana dispensaries. It would have, that would be the zoning district where these facilities are permitted, and it would have a 1,000-foot buffer between each of those facilities. So the density would be controlled in that fashion.
All right, so next week under consideration is just our announcement of public meeting. Will we also be considering the draft ordinance as well?
Has to go before this.
Yes, we'll circulate the draft ordinance. I think it's been circulated informally, but we'll get it in the agenda packet for next week.
Terrific. Any other questions or comments or anything else my colleagues would like to address this evening? Hearing nothing, I would, before I entertain a motion to adjourn, I would like to thank our guests this evening for their excellent work, as well as all the members of the public who assisted them in the projects, and in particular with the Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Plan. Thank you all. There was a slide flashed earlier of the names of the folks who assisted in that, but I'm going to go ahead and read them aloud because I think they are worth heralding. Committee members were Brian Barrett, Eileen Matola, Jal Alvery, Jamie Gelosian, Peter Puglianese, Rich Kerr, Gail Farley Semerad, Ben Vaughn, Paul Davitt, David Shannon, and Peter Hickman. Some of you are in the audience tonight. Those of you who aren't, who may be watching at home, thank you all for your commitment to our township and your work on this project. I appreciate it. Unless anybody else has anything to add, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
We are adjourned.